Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Vasjante Dashitarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivashari Gauravaktarinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasinduvyeva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So first of all, I'd like to say it's a great pleasure, by Srila Prabhupada's mercy, to be here with all the devotees, his servants. We may have so many people, different Vaishnavas, Acharyas that we've been initiated by, but the gold standard is Srila Prabhupada, meaning that everyone in this ISKCON movement is under the direction of His Divine Grace. I heard about Srila Prabhupada the first time in 1971 in the University of Texas, and I received a magazine from Vishnu Jan Swami, and I didn't know he was Vishnu. I didn't know what a Swami was even, but and so I looked at it. I just remember this very distinctly. When I opened it up, on the front there was Mahavishnu and floating in the causal ocean, and on the back was Srila Prabhupada walking up some steps, and I had this very intense feeling that I knew this person. Well, I didn't know who he was. I didn't know anything. I didn't even know if the figure on the front was male or female. I just wasn't sure. Looked very beautiful, but kind of bodily features of a man. It was all a mystery. But one thing I can remember very clearly, that was my introduction to Srila Prabhupada. And from that point on, of course, the devotees, there was no temple. Devotees left, and I came in contact with the, seriously practicing Krishna consciousness in 1973. I was in the army, and devotees sent me books, and they said, you should do Sankirtan. They sent me like 15 boxes of books, and they said, please do Sankirtan. So I said, what's that? And they told me, to sell the books to the people. So I said, okay. And I started doing that, and then I asked, what is the, why are we doing this? Why do we sell these books? I knew nothing about Krishna consciousness. There was no devotees. And he said, because this is what Prabhupada wants. Of course, then I knew who Prabhupada was. And before that, I was practicing different yoga process under Paramahansa Yogananda. But when I read Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, I knew that this is it. This is the real thing. Okay? I just threw away all the other books that I had, and then a few days later I got robbed, and they took everything except for Srila Prabhupada's books, everything, chair, record player, this and that. I just felt that as soon as I saw Srila Prabhupada, as soon as I understood who he was, and as soon as I started doing Sankirtan, that Prabhupada indicated to me that this is your life. There's nothing else. There's nothing else except for Krishna consciousness. So then I had to go through this routine, being in the army, and I was very fortunate that I had to spend very little time working, and most of the time I could do Sankirtan. Krishna's right. I worked maybe 10 hours a week, and then because I was fast at what I was doing, and it was all Prabhupada's mercy. I didn't have to live with the other soldiers. I didn't have to work very hard, and I just had to do Sankirtan. So that was my introduction to Srila Prabhupada's desire, was distributing his books. And then when I got out of the army in October of 1975, I joined the Radha Damodar party and the library party, distributing sets of books in the libraries. And then my temple president said, if you collect enough for yourself and myself to go to India, then you can go and get initiated. So I said, oh, wonderful. So I did that, and when we arrived in Mayapur, Srila Prabhupada was there, and because my temple president was one of the oldest devotees, so they put him and myself on the same floor as Prabhupada. Many of the devotees had to sleep on the wall. There were spaces on the wall, outside on the boundary wall of Mayapur. And the Lotus building was the only building, and wasn't finished, wasn't totally finished. And then Prabhupada's secretary came out, and he said, does anyone know how to type? So I was like this. And he said, yes, we need you to type some, help me type some things for Prabhupada. And because of that, you'll have to stay right here outside of Prabhupada's room. So I thought, okay. So I moved up about 20 meters toward Prabhupada, and this room was like about where that speaker is. And so the first thing I typed was the sannyas mantra. He gave me, there was 6 devotees taking sannyas that year, and so I had to type up the sannyas mantra, so I learned it, and I said, this is nice. I'd like to do this sometime. And so then, every day, so I made good friends with the 2 guards. One guard was Brahmananda Maharaj, and the other was Chitananda Swami. So I made friends with them. And I said, so, is it all right if I go up to Prabhupada's window and just observe? And he said, yeah, if you don't get caught, no problem. Otherwise, if Prabhupada doesn't see you, no problem. And so I would do that every day, at 2 times, different times. Especially when I saw Prabhupada was speaking to someone, I would go up and kind of stay in the little corner, the lower west side corner of Prabhupada's room, and look. And I distinctly remember, I saw him meeting with GBC people, with leaders from all over the world. But I distinctly remember that he would spend so much time with the Sankirtan devotees. And I remember specifically that year that Hridayananda Maharaj came from South America with just the new books printed in Spanish language. And so Prabhupada was so happy. He was happy to see any leader, he was happy about anything. But he was especially happy to see books being printed. Then every day I would watch him, and I noticed one very distinct characteristic of Srila Prabhupada was that when he would eat, he would take prasadam, he would meditate. He would take it, make a little ball, and then he would hold it, and he would look at it for 2-3 seconds. I could see he's meditating. This is Krishna. Not like us, sometimes we just go like this, with our fingers. But he would just go out and then he would toss it into his mind. He would never touch his fingers. At least I never saw him. Maybe he did. I never saw him. I watched him maybe 5 times. He didn't like very much that anyone was there when he was taking prasadam. Prabhupada would like to take prasadam alone generally, unless his godbrother, one of his godbrothers came. And I just noticed, sometimes Prabhupada would take his pen and he would meditate on it, before he would write. And it seemed to me, of course I can't confirm it, but it seemed to me he was meditating on what he would write down. Everything was very deliberate. Everything was very specific. And then one day I got to go, the only day I got to go on the morning walk. I was at the end because I was the youngest devotee. sannyasis and, old-time temple presidents, they would be up front. And, so Prabhupada, he started out, and then he signaled everybody with his cane to go by. Everybody went by, looking back to see what Prabhupada wanted. And then Prabhupada came and he stopped everyone. He said, "Malecha." And he pointed to a piece of paper that was on the ground. And he said, "Brahmana means clean." So it was like my first, I thought it was something special was going to happen. Didn't realize I was getting chastised. And then, something I distinctly remember was one morning, and just when Prabhupada came in for the deity greeting, they would come in, he would offer his obeisances, and then go sit on the Vyasasana and start the class. And sometimes there was Guru Puja, sometimes there wasn't. So this day he walked in, and one man came in and he went up to Prabhupada like this. Showing so much devotion. And then he started crying and started rolling on the ground in front of the deities. And Prabhupada, I just watched him, he went like this. And then he looked at Ramananda, and he took his cane and he went, like that 3 times. And so Ramananda and another devotee just picked him up. It was still like moving around, rolling around. They just put him outside the temple. I thought that was very unique. Another time, in Mayapur, Prabhupada just saying some things that really impressed me. Prabhupada came, and we were having kirtan, and that time everyone was young. Almost every devotee was in their 20s, some devotees were in their teens, like some of you are young people. And so the devotees were running up and down, full speed, from Prabhupada's Vyasasana to the altar and back and forth. And Prabhupada stopped, he stopped everything, and he sat down on the Vyasasana without going to the deities or anything. And he said, "This is not Krishna consciousness, this is lust." And he said that kirtan means that we're dancing for the pleasure of the deities, we're singing for the pleasure of the deities, we're playing for the pleasure of the deities, not for our own pleasure. The pleasure will automatically come. And so I remember that. And it relates especially this weekend because we're celebrating Srila Prabhupada, his anniversary, the deity's anniversary. So he taught us that Krishna consciousness, Harinam Sankirtan, Kirtan, it's all meant to be directed as a service. It's a service. It's not for my pleasure. But I will get pleasure. And if I don't get pleasure from giving the service, it means that I'm not really understanding the nature of bhakti. Bhakti is to please others, is to please the Supreme Lord, to please the Vaishnava. So that really impacted me. And sometimes we do things in kirtan that are not always so orthodox. We have that tendency to be creative. So, and then we went to Vrindavan, and I got very sick. My initiation was coming up. I was so sick. I lost like 15 kilos. And I don't have that many kilos anyway, so I was very, so my temple president said, "You're so sick, maybe you shouldn't get initiated." I said, "No, better I die. At least I'll die trying." And so I went to the initiation, very, very sick. But I sat there, and then it was maybe about 50 or 60 devotees getting initiated. And so the person before me, I was sitting here thinking, no meat eating, no gambling, no illicit sex, going over the 4 regulating principles again and again and again. I was so nervous. And then the person before me, Prabhupada asked everybody, he said 4 regulating principles. The person before me, Prabhupada said, what are the 10 offenses against the holy name? I go, oh, no. I'm barely remembering these 4 principles. But luckily when I came up, Prabhupada said, what are the 4 regulating principles? And even then I barely remembered them. And I didn't even hear my name like that, just like that. I asked Adhikeshava Swami, what is my name? Guruprasad. So I was very happy. And then in Vrindavan, it was just wonderful being there with Prabhupada. So one day, Prabhupada stopped the kirtan again. I could see how Prabhupada was very concerned that we kept the proper standard. It's not like free-for-all. I just read the other day, Prabhupada said, one of the symptoms of Kali Yuga is everyone will perform devotional service as they see fit. Otherwise, people will just do it according to their own mind. And of course, Prabhupada wasn't saying that was good. He was saying that's a tendency. So, what Prabhupada said, and he said, I know because the person that was temple president, his name was Vishwakarma from Canada, he was temple president of Toronto Temple. And Prabhupada called him over, and he said something in his ear. And Prabhupada said, this is not proper kirtan. So afterwards, Vishwakarma, because I was staying with him in Calcutta, so I said, what did Prabhupada say? He said, he is singing like a demon. And so, what was he doing? He was like going, oh, like this kind of singing. And Prabhupada didn't like it so much. And then, another thing that I remember very clearly, when we went to Delhi, after the Vrindavan festival, we went to Delhi, and we were every day, the cows would come right after prasadam, would come exactly, the cows knew when to come. And like 4 or 5 cows from the neighborhood. And we were giving them some something off our plates. And Prabhupada called us up on the balcony. He was chanting on the balcony. And he called us up. And he said, the cow is your mother. You do not give your remnants to your mother. And so another valuable lesson. So the next day, we all bought bananas. So we waited for the cows to come. And of course, prasadam was late because the cows knew when to come, because we would always give them remnant. So we had to retrain the cows to come earlier so that we would, and that wasn't hard. You just held some bananas up and they would come. And so we learned something very valuable. What is the mentality of a Vaishnava? Prabhupada was teaching us that the mentality of a Vaishnava is a servant, and servant of the cows, servant of the Vaishnavas. Prabhupada said that the 3 aspects of civilization are that promoting love of God, promoting Brahminical culture, and protecting the cows. So if these 3 things are not there, it is not real civilization. Sometimes we speak about ancient civilizations, but according to Prabhupada, they would be ancient incivilizations. So there were many other things, but we have a ceremony. I just wanted to mention those things. And I think the most important thing is to understand what it means by founder Acharya. Prabhupada said there should be, he said in Mayapur, we should have hundreds of Acharyas. Prabhupada said no, thousands of Acharyas. And Prabhupada said no, 10,000s of Acharyas. And Prabhupada said no, 10 millions of Acharyas. And then what was, he was saying that anyone, achar means behavior, and acharya means one who teaches behavior by their own behavior. So, but Prabhupada is the founder acharya, meaning that his behavior, his example, what he said is what is the standard for all of us. So this is something we should remember in these days, whenever we, special days, Srila Prabhupada Puja, and every day, because every day is an offering of gratitude to Srila Prabhupada, without whom we would not have ever, experienced Krishna consciousness. So I just wanted to emphasize that we have to try to take Srila Prabhupada's teachings and make those teachings the very center of our existence. And I'm also very happy to be here at this time, because normally I would never be here. Many times the devotees have invited me for deity anniversary, and I can never go because I'm always in Mayapur. At this particular, usually we have to start our GBC meetings on the day after, 2 days after Nityananda Trayodashi. It just works out by the calendar, so that we can have everything up to work. So that's a special opportunity. I don't know, hopefully we'll be able to resume our normal normal lives, or semi-normal lives, without running around in masks and all these restrictions. And then, of course, I'll be very happy. I'm happy to be here now, but I would be happy also to be in Mayapur. So, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Thank you all very much for your attention.